Welcome, weary traveler. It's time for the Book Corner with me, Misha Tagana, the podcast where we discuss all things books, and more books. Sometimes I throw in some travel stuff in there where I'm reading a book, maybe some tea or wine, what I'm drinking when when I'm reviewing this book or reading this book. But let's get into it and talk about today's book. Finally, I am starting a podcast. I think I've told people that I was going to start a podcast for the better part of 5 or 6 years now. So here we are. It's time for a podcast. This is my first episode, so please be kind. Welcome to the very first conversation with myself on the Book Corner with Mish Atagana. I am Mish Atagana, obviously. So I read a lot. I am a compulsive reader. That's how I describe myself to people. I enjoy getting lost in books. I enjoy getting sucked into a whole new world and just living that life for however long the book lasts. The problem with me, though, is I'm also a fast reader. So I don't really give books that much long to live with me. If I start a book on a Monday, best believe if it's not done by Wednesday afternoon, I must be really busy with work, right? I read every morning. I wake up naturally at 5 a.m., between 5 and 6 a.m. I naturally wake up. So I read for about an hour or two before my day gets started. I read every evening before I go to sleep. So in a day, I will get about 4 hours of reading done. And since I was a kid, I just really enjoyed reading. I remember when the Harry Potter books will come out, and I would beg my mom to please go get me a Harry Potter book. And if she said no, I would literally go cry to my dad, who would eventually convince her to get me the books. And I would just read all day, all night. And I had to be convinced to eat. As an adult, I've managed that a little bit better now. But I thought, I love books so much, and I've just been reading so much the last month. Last year, I didn't get to read as much as I wanted to, not because of space to read. I mean, to be fair, work was really crazy last year. But what I just felt was I was reading all these nonfiction biographies. I was reading, business book, which are all lovely and great. But it's not my first love when it comes to books. My first love when it comes to books is fantasy and just high impact fiction, right? So this year I decided, the year 2024, I'm only going to read fantasy books. So if you've got a really good fantasy that you just think I have to read, please share it my way. But I also, I'm reading some really just high value and high impact, intensely, engrossing fiction as well. I wanted to start a book club, but no one wants to join a book club with me because I read too fast for them. And I want to do a book club meeting every week as opposed to every month. And so I thought, well, I'll start a podcast and I can talk about books. And I'm happy to do that. So today we're actually talking about three books in one. After waiting for what seems like an age, all three Atlas books are out. So the Atlas trilogy, which is what I'm calling them, or have finally all been released. It's by Olivie Blake. She is such a fascinating writer, and we're gonna get into just her writing and what I think about her writing and the way she writes just now. But there are three books in this series: the Atlas Six, which is the first book, the Atlas Paradox, which is the second book, and the Atlas Complex, which is the final book of the trilogy. So, quick contextualization for you. I'm going to do my best not to give it away, but I feel this is pretty much the biggest books in the world right now. So, if you like fantasy, you probably already read them. If you haven't, maybe I can convince you, or maybe not. We'll see what I think of the books. We'll see how it goes, right? Um, so it's a book about our world, but our world that exists with magic, right? There are people who have magical ability, Some of them are just witches, and they can perform magical spells, do magic things. But then there are Medians. Medians are your high level, magicians, or your high level magical beings. So think about them as if you are classifying in Star Wars term, because I also love Star Wars. They're like Jedi's. They're like magical Jedi's. I suppose that's how I would look at them. Highly talented, have a very some of them have like a very specific specialization, and they're ace at it, right? And our story essentially begins with these two very interesting people who are opposites, Nico and Libby. They hate each other, but they're both incredibly talented physicists. So physicists are people who can manipulate matter around them. So, and Olivie really likes science. She loves science because all have read another of her books, and she likes to weave in the world of science and quantum physics into what she does. So these physicists can manipulate matter around them. They can reshape things and, make it seem like the way they manipulate matter is like conjuring things out of thin air, but they're literally just moving around the matter around them. They can disappear themselves into another place, that kind of. So we begin with them, and essentially they're approached by this guy who asks them to come to a mysterious meeting, and hence we're introduced to Mr. Atlas Blakely, who is literally the core of all our characters meet. So the Atlas Six, we're introduced to the Atlas Six. These are six Medians, two of them from New York, one of them from London, another from Cape Town, South Africa, and another who based in Paris, but she is of Middle Eastern descent, so Iranian, and she lives in Paris now. And then we have another one from Japan. I do like that she tried to pull around the world. What I find a lot with some fantasy writers, they kind of stick to what they know. So if they know the US or they know the UK, all their characters are from there and exist there. And it just narrows their magical world sometimes. So what I did like that Olivie Blake did here is she really opened up the world of magic, where it's a global, community, and people, the incredibly talented, magicians or Medians can come from anywhere in the world. And that for me was really exciting. And I really, really like that. And I just feel that, for most people who are around the world who read these books as well, it just makes them feel a little bit good to kind of hear their country or their city being mentioned in a book, or their continent, taking a prominent role. So we have the six Medians. They all get Atlas Blakely's invite, a mysterious invite to join this mysterious society, and they all show up to this house. And when they get there, they get told, well, you are being given a sort of fellowship slash apprenticeship in this Society of Alexandrian, which is based off the ancient Library of Alexandria. And I know, who would have thought, right? So I also quite like this trip because of, if any of you have watched the show, The Librarians, about like this world's incredible magical library that moves from, you know, that exists outside of space and time, but is anchored in New York. There's a sense of that. So it reminded me a lot of this idea of this ancient library, and the library has moved from Alexandria to other parts of the world, and currently the home of the library is London, right? And one of the things that I quite found fascinating here is I'm also a huge fan of a TV show called Warehouse 13. And it also reminded me a little bit of Warehouse 13 and how Warehouse 13 moved around, and how you can, follow Warehouse 13 will go to wherever the world superpower is at the moment. So that, I thought that was like quite an interesting thing, where she didn't reinvent the wheel of the way ancient magical things work. So like a library that we all have read about. If last year I went to Egypt with my sister, and we went to Alexandria, and my main reason for wanting to go was to go visit the library, right? So it was such an interesting thing for me to kind of want to dig into a little bit more about the role of the library in the story. So these six guys, they get together, and in the Atlas Six, we spend a lot of time getting to know them a little bit, right? So we've got our two physicists from New York. We've got like our empath slash mind reader slash emotion reader from Cape Town. We've got our telepath from Paris by way of Tehran. We've got our not quite sure what his magic is, bloke from London, and then we've got our nature, Median from Japan, who is not quite sure if she's interested in her power or owning that power. And we spend a lot of time meeting people who have such deep sense of, either insecurity or overconfidence, or what looks insecurity masked by overconfidence. But we don't actually know what the purpose of all of this is, right? They get into this place and they get told, you got to work together to, grow your powers, learn and research things, come up with projects together. But there's no actual guide of what the study is. All they know is at the end of the year of their first year in the society, one of them has to, only five of them can move forward to the second year, right? And they don't know what the process of elimination is. They don't know how it works. And there's a lot of emotional kind of work that some of them do in the story, but there's so much mind games, there's intrigue. So Olivie likes to write. I like how I call her Olivie, like we're best mates and we on first name basis, but she loves words. When you read a book by an author that really loves words, but also she loves like psychological mind play. There's a lot of dialogue sometimes, and there's a lot of inner assessment and inner conversations that characters have with themselves. We really spend a lot of time here with our six, but I feel we learn a lot more about the relationship between Nico and Libby in book one, and all the other characters. They kind of come in a bit. I do think she does give them a fair amount of time each, but I definitely feel like I learned a lot more about Nico and Libby, and also Parisa. So Parisa, who's our telepath from Paris, I know Parisa from Paris. Um, she's incredibly manipulative from my read of her, but other people might read it as she's very calculating, which could mean the same thing. And because she's a woman in the world, she's constantly trying to disarm people before they can disarm her. So we learned a little bit about that as well. But for me, the Atlas Six, what I thought was really good was the characters felt like they were in a good place. Like I really liked the characters, right? And I couldn't wait to see how much more they could develop. So that I really liked. And there was an interesting twist that they had. And I don't want to give it away, but it's so hard. But there's an interesting twist that they had about a character connected to Libby that isn't part of the house, that I thought was cleverly done, and I would not have seen it coming. So I thought that was super interesting. So for me, I really enjoyed reading Atlas Six. So that's the first book in the trilogy, and I really, really enjoyed reading it. Now, the second book, which is the Atlas Paradox, this is now interesting. So there are now five people left in the society. The sixth person is now, been stolen, and the other five, thanks to a very persuasive Nico, they have to band together to try and figure out a way to find the missing sixth character. It's so random. Like I don't want to tell you who gets stolen, because if you haven't read any of the books, I don't want you to now know what's gonna happen, right? So essentially, we spend so much time here with them doing what is called independent study, but it's just them putting together project. But in that time, a sinister plot is being revealed to us as the reader, right? And I use the word sinister plot on purpose, because when we get to the Atlas complex, I'm going to talk about the sinister plot. So it really, becomes a case where they're all left with themselves. So they're spending so much time in isolation. They're all feeling that something is taken from their power. And it is, the library is draining them slowly or feeding on them. That's the sense I got. But their mental health is completely, at a place where it's starting to break down. We have Callum, who's the Cape Town character. He is pretty much now a full-blown alcoholic. He cannot really pull himself together. We've got, a character from Japan who, for some reason, I have now forgotten her name. It will come to me, but she's now developed a god complex, which is fascinating to me. And I really, really, thought that was an interesting uh, way to kind of portray the growth of this character. And then Parisa, who's now in this weird, confused affair with one of the instructors slash researcher in the house, is now completely beginning to not quite sure what is real and what is not, right? And our London guy is Tristan. He's now starting to understand a little bit more about what his powers are and what they can do. So for me, Paradox, is actually a really interesting book because it's a study also in the minor characters, like what happens when people's psyche begin to fracture, what happens when you lose complete grip on reality because people have hurt you so badly enough, or you have literally gotten so caught up in something and you don't even know how to manage. And what also happened, Reina, that's the name of the Japanese character. Her name is Reina. And she can talk to plants. And I like it just, so for me, Paradox was just really a strong case of this. It's like we're all going stir crazy and we don't know how to cope. And also the idea that gets really tested, and this is a theme in the whole series, is like, what does goodness mean, you know and I really kind of like the way where the Olivie kind of makes the characters confront that, like, what are your morals? Are you truly good? Is there such a thing as to be truly good, and is there such a thing to be truly bad? I just, for me, Paradox was such a fascinating book because it just really made minor characters have such a strong impact that when you're done reading something a minor character's done, you have to take a breath and go, I'm sorry, what was that? I thoroughly love that. And then Complex. So the Atlas Complex, the final book, it just came out, I think, early this year. And for me now, we are all six members of the team are reunited, but things are not okay. It is not things are not what they seem. Their alliances have gone out of the way. People don't trust each other. There's secrets being kept, and we don't actually know who the real mastermind of this sinister plot, which Nico begins to refer to, this big grand plan that Mr. Atlas Blakely had for his six. So it becomes a case where we're just waiting to figure out what actually happens next. The things I liked in the complex was, one, I really love that Tristan has gotten a proper hang on his power. Like, he really, really, comes to his powers. I also love the dynamic between Callum and Tristan. So this time, Callum, Reina are together on a world changing quest. Parisa and Dalton, our devoted and in love with Parisa researcher, living their best Parisian slash New York, wherever they end up lifestyle. Libby and Nico are back in the house. Nico's friend, best friend now, maybe something more, is with them in the house. His name is Gideon. He's like a not quite human creature, but I want you to read it to learn more about it. And Tristan has decided to stay on in the house because he wanted to kind of understand better what his role was in this thing. And I just, was hoping that there was a time where we could bring them all together again. But the way the story kind of played out was very almost individual based, whereas the point of Atlas bringing them together was to do something together. So Tristan and Callum, they have like this text-based relationship where they texted all the time, or Callum is texting, and sometimes Tristan responds. And it's like it begins with death threats, and the way the potential for it was just built, it was so beautiful. I really loved it. My big disappointment with the trilogy is that this potential wasn't fully properly actualized the way I think it could have been. And then Reina, who I also felt her power could have been something that could have just been really brought out to us, it just feels like it just was flat. Like there was no crescendo to her story in the end, which really made me sad. And then Libby and Nico, oh goodness me, what a fascinating, journey for him. For me, when I began the story, I thought I wasn't gonna like Nico, but by the end, he really, really, really turned out to be my favorite character, and I just thoroughly just enjoyed, the way he and Gideon's story is built out. And there's all these other minor characters, but guys, you have to read these books, right? I um I genuinely feel that the conclusion with the Atlas complex could have been so much better. I think that, we got so carried away with clever words and almost mind games in the way the writing was played out here. But the story, I think the first two books, I really enjoyed where the story was going. And I wish there was more we could learn about the role of the library. Like, this is a sentient library. What does it mean to be a sentient library? What are some of the things that we could have learned? I wish the character of the library itself was more developed in the story. But, that being said, I still think it's a worthy read. It's such an interesting story. I think Olivie Blake has a fascinating and different way of writing. Um, she's very, very big on just that human mind and mental health. I noticed plays a large role in her writing. And I think if you're reading it, you've got to go with the fact that don't get exasperated sometimes, where you just feel, oh my gosh, these characters are so full of themselves and they're so self-important, right? Don't get exasperated by that. Really, like, push through, because I do think, like, especially Paradox. Oh my goodness, especially Paradox. Just the way minor characters just play in there, I just really liked it. But anyway, that's it for the Atlas trilogy. If I had to give it a score, I don't know, maybe I'll do scoring here. If I have to give it a score, I'll give, as a trilogy, I'll give it a 7 out of 10, because I think it's a strong trilogy. Individual books, Atlas Six, definitely an 8 out of 10. Atlas Paradox, 8.5. Atlas Complex, I'll give that like a 6 or a 5 out of 10. But thank you so much for listening, and I hope that you come back next week for more books at the Book Corner with Mish Atagana. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Book Corner with me, Mish Atagana. Next week, we're going to go on another amazing adventure together, so I hope to see you there. Please don't forget to check out my quick reviews on Instagram and TikTok. I'm Globe Mish on Instagram, and I'm Mish Atagana on TikTok. See you soon.